Hi, this is Harley Tabak, the President and CEO of JHL, and we're providing you, our team members, this video to help bring you up to speed on the vaccine that we're expecting within the next couple of weeks. We know that there are a lot of questions about it, and we've solicited those questions from you so that we can make better use of our experts' time who will be speaking momentarily. Dr. David Rimland, who is that expert, has had a long career as an infectious disease physician. He's worked extensively at Emory and within the Veterans Administration, and also as an advisor to the CDC. He sits on our Quality and Risk Management Committee as a volunteer. He has no financial interest in the organization. He truly just gives his time because he wants to help our community. And so we're very honored to have him here today as an expert to help answer some of those questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Shar Bayer, our Chief Marketing and Communications Officer, and she's going to moderate the discussion and feeding the questions that you've provided primarily to Dr. Rimland, but also to a few of us also on this call, Jeff Copen, our Chief Operating Officer, Cheryl Chambers, our Director of Assisted Living Operations, and Sarah Popowski, our Chief Human Resource Officer. So, Shari, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Rimland. Appreciate you being here today. So we collected from about 35 team members, they submitted questions, and I have gathered those all together and thought we could just run them through, and you can answer some of the questions. We might have Harley or some of the others, but I think let's just get to it. So one of the most frequently asked questions is, what are the ingredients inside the COVID vaccine? Is it going to change my DNA? Are there microchips or pork or eggs in it? And are they injecting me with live virus? Tell us about that.
Okay. Let me, it probably would help to give a little bit of background for vaccines in general in terms of how they're made and how this is different. In the past, we have used either live viruses that can be attenuated or weakened. And there are still some active vaccines that have this type of virus method to give immunization. There are some viruses that actually can be killed. So you take the entire virus, kill it so it's not live, and it can be injected to people to, again, develop an antibody response. There are viruses and vaccines that you actually take pieces of the virus and proteins and inject it, again, to develop an antibody response to be protective. What is different about this vaccine is it's made with something called messenger RNA, which is a little bit of genetic material that can make a little bit of the protein of one part of the virus, the so-called spike protein, which is what attaches to the lung cells and how this particular virus can produce infection. So this little bit of mRNA gets injected into muscle. It is picked up perhaps a little bit by muscle cells, but mostly by other immune cells in the body, and gets only into the cellular part, not into the nucleus of the cell. So that this particular little bit of genetic material produces a little bit of the spike protein, and that little bit of spike protein elicits the antibody response, which is protective against getting infection. So that this particular vaccine, there is nothing live, there is no live COVID at all. It is only a little piece of the genetic material. It's also important to understand that this messenger RNA never gets into the nucleus of the cell, so it cannot change your DNA, for example, and that's always been something that's a myth out there in terms of what this particular vaccine can do. What happens to the messenger RNA, once it elicits a little bit of protein to make the spike protein, it is eliminated very quickly from the body, so it does not stay in the body at all. The only thing you have is the immune reaction to produce antibodies, which will then protect against the virus infection itself. The components are actually fairly simple. It's a messenger RNA, this little piece of genetic material. There's a little bit of what's called nanoparticles of lipids, or tiny little lipid components which stabilize that messenger RNA so it doesn't get broken down in the body. But other than that, whatever else is in there is actually proprietary material, but there seems to be very little else. There's nothing to suggest there's no egg component, there's no pork component, there's no shellfish. None of those things that people sometimes get concerned about in terms of allergies are a component of this virus. So it should be a very simple thing in terms of any potential reactions.
And no microchips, as far as you know.
No microchips, despite all the myths out there that Bill Gates has somehow put microchips so he could track everybody. No way that could be done.
Okay, great. All right. Another question that a lot of our team members asked is, you know, the majority of our team members are persons of color. And, you know, this is a concern for this population. So talk to us about how safe is the vaccine for people of color, and should people of varying ethnic backgrounds take the vaccine?
Okay, this is, again, a very important issue. As you know, there's a disproportionate effect of the disease itself of COVID-19 in people of color, both in Blacks and in Latinx. And most of the data suggests that maybe 2 to 3 times fold the risk of people of color getting exposed, getting infected, and getting sick with this virus. So it's going to be very important, and really in terms of social equity, to be sure that people of color do get this vaccine and feel comfortable getting it. The original Pfizer studies, the last data that I've seen is about 10% of the people tested in the phase 3 studies, which is about 44,000 people. About 10% were Blacks and about 30% were Latinx. In the Moderna vaccine, which hopefully will be approved by tomorrow or by this weekend, it's actually a larger percentage, almost 30% were Blacks. So that it's been tested in a large number of people of color. The safety seems to be exactly the same as in non-people of color, so that there doesn't seem to be any different effect in terms of side effects. And more importantly, the efficacy, the ability to develop antibodies seems to be identical in people of color versus others. So that, again, I understand the concern that's been around really for a long time because of other things that have been done in medicine, but I think we can feel very comfortable that it's been tested, it's safe, it seems to be effective, and there's no reason to believe that it'll be any different. I think it'll be very important in the future, though, to understand that big efforts are going to have to be made to convince people of color that they need to get the vaccine. And I think this is going to be an effort that's made at every level, from the top of government to local communities to church leaders to others, to make people understand that this is really a very important vaccine and is totally safe and effective in those populations.
Well, you bring up a really good point, and one of the questions that came up from the staff is, you know, does the fact that the vaccine was approved through emergency use authorization, you know, does that make it any less safe? And you know, with when will all the research be completed so people can be a little more comfortable with it?
Okay, I think as everybody realizes, the speed at which this vaccine was developed was extraordinary. In the past, if we think about any other vaccines we've had around, it may take 5 years, 10 years even, to get all the studies that we really normally need and get the vaccine produced and then get it distributed to people. What is very different, and there are really 3 things that happened that made this a very different story in terms of getting this vaccine out very quickly. Number one, the technology was there, so that within actually a couple of weeks of the virus being identified in China, the Chinese were actually able to publish the entire genetic sequence of the virus. Once that was available, it was then fairly easy for companies that have been working with messenger RNA for other vaccines for a long time. So it's not that the technology was different. It's actually been worked on probably for about 10 years. But they rapidly had the genetic sequence they needed, were able to put it into these nanoparticles, and really very quickly have a vaccine potentially available that could be tested. What normally happens is you get through phase 1 studies where you see what the appropriate dosing is, that it's safe, that it actually elicits an antibody response. All that can be done very quickly. The second and third parts, actually testing to see that this was an effective vaccine, was able to be done very quickly simply because there is so much COVID-19 around. For other vaccines, like measles or even polio, there's not that much disease. So it takes a long time to accumulate enough patients getting exposed that got either a vaccine or a placebo to see how protective it is. What's very different here is that there is so much COVID-19 around, it was actually fairly easy to gather for the Pfizer 44,000 people, for the Moderna vaccine 30,000 people in a very short period of time, and then have enough people infected that you could see it was effective. So that was the second step, why that could be done so quickly. The third, and really very importantly, in the past, when pharmaceutical companies developed vaccines, they would wait until they got an approval before they started manufacturing, because they didn't want to spend a lot of money manufacturing before they knew that they had an effective vaccine and it could be done. What was done differently in this situation, because there is such an emergency, that there's so much disease around, that there was a commitment financially to actually produce vaccine even before anybody knew it was effective or that it would be produced. Or could actually be produced and used. So what happened was all three of these things kind of came together to shorten what is normally a longer process, but very importantly, none of the steps that we normally do in terms of testing a vaccine, from the phase 1, looking at safety, looking at what the antibody response is, to the point of actually testing what the side effects are. None of that has been changed. It has been reviewed very carefully by both FDA and outside groups of infectious disease people that review the data very carefully, and everybody feels very comfortable with it and being used in this setting. So yes, it is a miraculous development in a short period of time, but there are three very good things that happened to make it available so quickly. And I think I would feel very comfortable myself, for example, taking it. I don't think anything has been shortcutted in terms of making it a safe and knowing that it's an effective vaccine. The other part, just out of interest over here, we would have been happy with a vaccine that was 50% effective, and everybody would have been very comfortable with that. The FDA actually said ahead of time, if you can develop a vaccine that's 50% effective, we'll probably go ahead and approve it. Well, we are fortunate. Both of these mRNA vaccines appeared to be 95% effective in preventing symptomatic COVID-19. And that is remarkable in terms of that ability to do that. So I think overall, feel very comfortable. There was nothing that was bypassed or shortcutted in terms of making a safe and effective vaccine. And it's these three issues that I talked about that allowed it to be made as quickly as it was.
Wow, that's so interesting. I had no idea. All right, let's talk about side effects. Okay, so a lot of people want to know, will this give me respiratory issues? How long are side effects going to last? And, during the trial process, how many people, had side effects? And tell us about what that looks like.
Okay, the side effects are something that I think we're going to have to be very clear about. It is very clear that a lot of people, perhaps a third or so, will have sore arms. Not terrible. If in the grading that was done and looking at these were considered mild. Occasionally somebody has a little bit more of a sore arm. And there are a proportion of people, and varied a little bit, that would develop fatigue, that might develop some mild headaches, that might develop some mild fevers. Interestingly, it appeared that it was a little worse with the second dose after the first dose. And what's important that these are not terrible reactions. These are indications that the body is actually producing an immune response, which is actually good. It indicates that you are reacting to this little bit of mRNA and are producing antibodies, and these things, we can expect to happen. So it is going to be very important to warn people ahead of time. Interestingly, older people over 55, in the ways that the studies were done, were much less likely to have side effects than younger people. So that's something for me to keep in mind in terms of when I get it, and to worry a little less perhaps. So I think we're going to have to tell people that this is going to happen. Very importantly, there's been some concern about, well, how do you know after you've gotten the vaccine that some of these little side effects aren't actually from COVID-19? Well, as I said before, there's no way you can get the disease with the vaccine. It is certainly possible that you've been exposed to the virus after you've gotten, let's say, the first dose, and something may happen to make you sick, but it will not produce respiratory symptoms. And this is really important in terms of when physicians are trying to evaluate a potential side effect. So if you get a little fatigue and a little sore, or your muscle aches a little bit, if you're not having cough and you're not having respiratory symptoms, this could all still be related to the vaccine, and we don't have to worry about having had COVID. Obviously, if you start developing a lot of coughing or shortness of breath, you simply may have been unlucky and gotten exposed to the real virus and getting sick from that. We hope that's not going to happen very often, but this will be important to warn people that you may start feeling a little sick. In hospitals, one of the things that's been done, for example, is that there's going to be a little staggering of who gets the vaccine in areas where you don't want to have a shortage, for example, of ICU nurses. So you're not going to vaccinate every ICU nurse at exactly the same time, because if one of them feels a little sick for a day or two because they're having muscle aches or a little bit of low-grade fever, you don't want to wipe out all the healthcare providers during that time. So that's something that has to be thought about a little bit in terms of your staff and how they're going to get vaccinated, and perhaps staggering things a little bit. That may not be an issue for quite a while, because it's very clear that every facility, hospitals, and what happens in nursing homes, you're not going to get enough for everybody initially. There simply is not going to be enough vaccine during the initial numbers that go out. So it's probably going to be less of an issue in terms of giving it to everybody and then worrying that some people may have a little bit of fever or fatigue for a day or two. It's important that these are short-lived side effects. They may last for a day or two and then you're fine. So I think it's important to prepare people. You don't want to be surprised if this happens. And it will happen in a significant minority of people, that they will have some little bit of a side effect. As I said, the main things are fatigue, occasional headache, low-grade fever, some muscle aches, but that's it in terms of what's been described. The only other thing I'll mention is there's a lot of press recently about a couple of more severe allergic reactions. There were two that were described in the United Kingdom the first day that they were giving vaccine. And as of yesterday, there were actually two allergic reactions that occurred in Alaska, of all places. Why in that particular setting, I don't know. So that the warning that is being put out right now is anybody who has had severe allergic reactions in the past, people that carry an EpiPen or some sort of reaction they had, they should receive it in a more controlled setting where people can get epinephrine or something else that could be done. And in general, Pfizer right now is making the recommendation that everybody after they get the vaccine ought to sit in a room there for 15 minutes, be sure they're not having any particular side effect, and after that, they can go. So that's the approach that's being taken right now in terms of the sort of immediate potential for a side effect, and then the side effects that we can anticipate a significant minority of people will get, and just be prepared and realize that may happen.
Great information. All right, let's talk about some of the underlying medical conditions. So I was just talking with someone in our business office who was concerned, she has, some underlying, past health issues. She is, is immunocompromised. We have another team member who's a cancer survivor. And then we have several team members who've had COVID and are in varying stages of, long hauler versus, asymptomatic. So, what concerns should people have who have underlying conditions or potentially immunocompromised?
Okay. Right now, the evidence, and there were people actually in the vaccine studies that had underlying conditions, that had immunocompromising conditions, that had histories of cancer. There does not seem to be any evidence that they're going to have an adverse effect to the vaccine. And it may actually be more important for them because their underlying compromising conditions may make them more susceptible to the real disease and having worse complications. So right now, there are no contraindications in terms of people that have underlying conditions, that have a history of cancer. Even in people that are on immunosuppressive drugs right now, there's really no evidence that they will have an adverse event to the vaccine, so that there is no contraindication to them getting it. Now, the issue of people that have had previous COVID is an interesting one. Right now, there's actually no contraindication to receiving the vaccine, even if you've had previous COVID documented. There is one little soft recommendation suggesting that you might want to wait 90 days after you've had your COVID disease to get vaccinated. And the reason for that is not because we're concerned about any adverse effect, it's because we have data that people that get live disease will be protected and have antibody for at least 3 months. So there probably is no reason that they need to have the vaccine earlier, but there's no contraindication to getting it. The other reason that you may want to go ahead and get it, even if you've had documented COVID, is that 10 to 15% of people that have COVID actually never develop detectable antibodies. And whether they're susceptible to another episode in a short period of time is not clear right now. So the bottom line is, if you've had COVID, you may want to wait 3 months after you've had it because you're probably protected anyway. But if you've had, for example, asymptomatic disease and we never know that you were infected, there's no concern. There's no reason to believe that you're going to get any worse reaction from getting the vaccine.
Great information. One of our caregivers, Jackie, from the home asked, why 2 shots and not 1? And if I miss the second shot, what should I do?
Okay, right now, the reason for the 2 shots is because the trials that were done, the phase 3 trials, were getting 2 shots. And with Pfizer, it's 2 shots, 21 days apart. We don't know, and based on the antibody response, in other words, where they even got to the point of giving 2 shots is when they did the phase 1 trials, which is very early on, looking at what the dosing ought to be and why you needed 2 versus 1, is that if you got 1 shot, you didn't develop enough antibody. And that's the reason that with the phase 1 studies, they went to the 2 shots. When they did that, then they developed adequate antibody. And that's the decision was made to go ahead with the phase 3 trials and with the 2 doses. There's a little bit of a hint out there that 1 dose may be a little protective, but at the moment, everybody is saying, Pfizer is saying, the vaccine manufacturer, everybody is saying you really need the 2 doses. With the Pfizer, it'll be 21 days apart. With the Moderna, it's going to be 28 days apart. Why is there a difference? That's simply the time that was taken when they did the trials, and that's the way they were tested. So if we're going to be tested that way, and we say it's 95% effective if you do it that way, that's the way you should receive the 2 doses. We're hoping that everybody will go ahead and get the 2 doses. The recommendation, as I said, with the Pfizer, it's 21 days. There's a little bit of a leeway because it might be difficult to get everybody exactly. So there's about a 4-day leeway. You can wait a little bit longer. But the current recommendations are actually if you get the first dose and for some reason you can't get the second dose in the 25-day period, go ahead and get the second dose, but you don't have to start all over again. Just go ahead and get the second dose and we'll see what happens. What you have to realize is that this is very early, even after the phase 3 trials, and we only have a couple of months that people have been followed and tested. We're not sure what's going to happen after that. Questions come up, for example, are we going to need a booster? What happens after a year, for example? The answer is we have no idea right now. The hope is that it will last longer than a year, but we're going to have to follow people, look at their antibody responses in a year, and then see if we may need a booster dose at that point. Right now, there simply is no information to know whether we'll need one or not.
You're answering all of my questions here, which is wonderful. One of the biggest questions, the most popular question out of all of our team members is Jewish HomeLife going to require the vaccine, and why? Will there be a choice? So I thought maybe Harley, if you want to speak to that. You're on mute. There you go.
Sure, yes, Jewish HomeLife is going to mandate the vaccine as we do the flu vaccine within legal exceptions. There are some legal exceptions, as our staff knows already, with the flu vaccine. And we do this very deliberately and thoughtfully and with great sensitivity to everyone listening in on this video, because we know it's a concern. I hope you all understand that our number one priority is the safety of our residents and our staff. And we hope that that's how it is understood. We are doing this because we want to keep everyone healthy. And, you know, in many ways, I hope we will feel fortunate that we are one of the first types of organizations to be eligible to receive the vaccine. I have friends of mine, family who want to know, you know, when they can get it, and they know I, you know, work in long-term care, and and they are very anxious to get it themselves. And I, excuse me. So I hope that our team members appreciate that we are doing this with great thoughtfulness, and only with the concern about the safety of our residents and our staff. And that's the reason we're doing this video, because we know there are many questions about this this terrible disease that we've all been suffering through for the past almost year now. And you who are on the front line know it even better than I. And you know, I thought I'd ask one of my colleagues, Cheryl Chambers, who's you know, one of our most important management positions and has lived through COVID both professionally and personally, and whether she would share some of her insight into to the vaccine and why it's important. Cheryl?
Hi. I do feel like the vaccine is important. With any vaccine, of course, there's always some type of anxiety with anything that you do. Being here in the community, being on the front line and seeing what has happened to our residents, the folks that we have formed bonds with, and people that have become like family to us, that we love, seeing them be infected with this virus is hard. And even the greatest hurt of all is when we are the eyes and ears of family members because they can't get in, and if we send them to the doctor's office. So it's very difficult. So seeing that it's a tough for us. And the fact that we're saying that we're mandating it, for the lack of a better word, for me, I had anxiety because it's new, but is there a thought in my mind that I would not do it? It is not. Because from a personal standpoint, my father, a 73-year-old healthy male with no underlying health conditions, nothing wrong with him, seeing him infected with the COVID virus and not, you know, succumbing to it, and seeing that, You don't have to be a sickly person that's immune compromised, or you don't have to be a person with underlying health conditions. It's enough for me to say, I do not want my mother to be infected. She's not in a community. So if I have the opportunity to do what I can to protect her, and of course, shield my residents' families from the hurt and the pain of not being able to be by their bedside, not being able to be there to hold their hand and say that it's okay. We have to not let fear stop us from doing what we can to stop this terrible virus. And the fact that our company is saying that we want to protect our residents and our staff, and take the time to educate us, and make sure that we're in the numbers to be counted to get it first. I think that we should jump at the opportunity, because we're not only looking after our residents, but when we go home, we know that we're being safe with our families.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I think we all desperately want to return to some type of normalcy as soon as possible. It's been especially hard, as you said, on of our family members when we go home. So having the vaccine should, I hope, give you a greater comfort knowing that you're not risking them. You already risk yourselves coming here, and so I can't thank you enough for sharing that. I know how difficult it's been for you and everyone who's been risking your lives every day, taking care of our residents and family members. And hopefully with the vaccine, we can begin to be close to our loved ones, have our family members be close to their loved ones. Our families, as you know, are desperate to be in contact with their family members. That so many tragedies of people who I know who've not been able to say their last goodbyes to their loved ones because of this. It's something they'll never get over. And so we are jumping at the opportunity to stop that. We want to stop that. We want to get back to our normal lives as much as we can. And it's going to take a while. As Dr. Rimland knows, I mean, everything's new that we're learning about these vaccines and how often we'll have to be revaccinated. I mean, there's still so many unknowns, but thankfully there's scientists in this country and throughout the world who have dedicated their lives during the past year to bring this vaccine forward and others down the road. And I just hopefully we'll all grab the opportunity to take the vaccine so we can return to some normalcy.
Great, Harley, thank you. Speaking of protection and getting back to normal, one of the questions was, will masks and other PPE and infection prevention protocols still be in place after everyone is vaccinated? Jeff, do you want to take that?
Sure. As far as we know, we're going to continue to use PPE and spend money on those resources as we did before. And there are several reasons for that. One is that we could be vaccinated at different times. Another reason is the vaccine, though high efficacy of upwards of 95%, there's still 5% chance of getting the disease. Also, outside of just COVID, when we think about infection control, I think that this is the first time in my tenure in this industry that infection control was thrust upon this industry in a way that has never been thrust upon us before. And so it's not necessarily just about COVID going forward, but it's about minimizing infection of other things such as the flu and other potential pathogens in the buildings. So the easy answer is to say yes, for the time being, those protocols won't change. Over time, they may change as we adapt them to the recommendations that come out of the CDC, CMS, and the Department of Community Health. But for the time being, we will continue to protect with all the resources and tools that we have.
Shari, let me add something to that, if I could. Besides what Jeff mentioned, we know that even if it's 95% effective against preventing symptomatic disease, the one thing we don't know right now is whether it actually prevents you from getting infected and have the potential for transmitting to others. We will hopefully have that information over several months, but until we know that, it's going to be very important to continue wearing masks, not only in a situation of a nursing home, but really in general in public. And I think it's important for people to understand that it's going to be months before we have enough vaccine to get out to the general public. Until then, the issues of social distancing, wearing masks, washing your hands, it's going to have to be really important that people continue to do that despite the rollout of the vaccine.
Really good point. Okay, our last question is really more mechanics, and that is talking about, how is the staff going to know when it's time, and how are we going to continue to communicate with the staff if they have questions? Sarah, do you want to talk about that? And you're on mute, so you need to come off mute.
There we go. Yeah, so we're going to keep you up to date as we get information relative to receipt of the vaccine and its distribution throughout the organization. So just stay tuned, and we will, again, provide that information to you. With regard to questions, I know I've already had some conversations with some of you about your concerns related to taking the COVID vaccine. And I just want you to know that some of the questions that I have received have been addressed here from Dr. Rimland. Things such as, the speed of the authorization, the emergency use authorization of the vaccine, the impact of DNA are just some of the questions that have come to me through my conversations with some of you. And I want to encourage you to please come, to me or Aja or Paul in HR if you have concerns about taking the vaccine. We will listen to you. We will get these questions addressed. I've known many of you for many years, had many conversations with you, and I just want to let you know that there is an outlet here within Jewish Home Life for you to voice those concerns. So please know that you can reach us by phone, by email, by fax, whichever is most convenient, and we will get back to you. So please don't hesitate to do that.
All right, Harley, can you think of anything else?
Just to once again thank Dr. Rimland. We were very fortunate that he kindly agreed to serve on our Quality Risk Committee several years ago. He's dedicated his life to the study of infectious disease, as I think you've seen, and he has a very easy way of communicating complicated information in a very understandable way, and that's so deeply helpful to each of us right now. So I can't thank you enough, Dr. Rimland, for what you do for us and for many others.
All right, thank you.